Hello everyone. Today we'll be talking about how to play Mercy and Lucio. We won't really be covering how to read it, but rather how to effectively play a standard Lucio suitable for both high-level and low-level team play. So let's start with Lucio. Lucio settings include backwards wall riding, which I think you should have on because it allows you to wall ride backwards and shoot at the same time. So you're effectively able to continue a steady DPS output without necessarily needing to turn around and then wall ride away. So you can maintain your speed whilst on a wall and shoot at the same time with this setting on. So do turn that on. The other setting is hold for crossfade. This setting I have off, but some Lucio players have it on because it forces you to hold your key to be on speed. Otherwise, by default, you're on heals. It's a little bit inconvenient, but it's important because when you get CC'd, you can no longer register key inputs during that time. So if you were stunned by a flashbang or a shatter, you'd automatically switch back to heals because you could not be putting in a key input when you're CC'd. So this might help you live through the damage of the flashbang, stun, and headshot after, or you might help your team out if you're all shattered on the floor. Someone might live. So it's a small thing. And wall jump on release is just a preference thing. Ultimately, the settings that you choose are a matter of what's comfortable for you as a player, so play with them until you find what works for you. So speed versus heals. When should you be using which and why? So Lucio's speed gives him a 25% movement buff to anyone in his aura. He heals about 16 HPS to anyone in the aura and 12.3 on himself per second. The area of effect is 12 meters of radius in every direction. You should be on speed when your team needs to rotate, so any kind of reposition falls under this category. When you guys need to engage, so never be on heals when your team is running in, because your team will ultimately take more damage because your rotation time is longer. And then when you're disengaging, so if you lose a member and your team wants to get out, you don't all have to die in that situation. You can use your speed to help everybody leave. Alternatively, if you're disengaging because you want to kite an ultimate, so for example, Diva Bomb goes off in the air above your team's head, you should be on speed so everyone can get to cover. Otherwise, sometimes people are too far away from cover and your speed would have made a difference in them surviving, but if you don't speed, your team will die. Chasing. So if you want to fight, or you have an advantage of the enemy team, say their Ryan has no shield, you should press your advantage with speed. So anytime you need to move somewhere, you should be on speed. What about healing? You should be on heals when your team needs to stabilize, so make sure that your team is safe before stabilizing, even if that means speeding backwards when everyone is low, instead of healing whilst they're still in the line of fire. Because Lucio's heals are ultimately not that great, so it's better to get them into cover and then stabilize them there, versus leaving them in the line of fire to take continuous damage that you're unable to heal through. You should also be on heals when your team is stationary, so that involves when your team is grouping up, when your team is yet to rotate, and when both teams are already fighting each other, like they're already brawling. So if both your Rhines are swinging on each other, it's okay to be on heals. The third time you'd be on heals is when you're trying to heal your other healer or a squishy who is unable to be healed by your big heals. So for example, if your Kree is off angling, that would be prime time for you to be on heals, because maybe he is half HP and you need to top him back off, but your big heals can't look away from the tank. But it is also your job to heal your big heals so they don't need to use the regen burst or their nade on themselves, because that resource could be better used for the team or for the tanks. So what about amp? Amp usage is a little bit different, still similar to when you'd be using your regular speed and regular heals. So when and why? So Lucio amp gives a speed buff of 60%, movement buff, or 52 HPS, 40 on yourself, for a duration of 3 seconds, and it has a pretty long cooldown at 12 seconds. It's one of the longer cooldowns in the game. This is obviously indicative that we have to be careful of how we use this cooldown, otherwise we might waste it and then be in sticky situations for the 12 seconds following while we're waiting for it to come back. A lot of Lucio players misuse it, and this happens particularly in low elo. They just amp heals all the time, but amping speed is equally, if not more, valuable. So you should amp speed during engages, so make sure you're close enough that team is able to run them over during those 3 seconds. If it's not 3 seconds away from the enemy team, you shouldn't be amping because it only lasts 3 seconds when you're disengaging. So it is absolutely okay to save amp for certain ultimates that you know will get used that fight if you're all tracking correctly. This is a super strong, great thing to do. So Diva Bomb, Window, Flux, and Blizzard are some of the ones I typically hold amp for where I can. I can amp my team out of a Blizzard, completely denying the enemy Mei's Blizzard if she doesn't wall us off in a small area. So we could amp and get them out, and no one would get caught in Blizzard. So denying a whole ultimate just with speed, amp. Same with Window. If we know that the Baptiste on the enemy team is going to window that fight, then we could totally, absolutely save our amp and get our team out of the way of the window quickly so no one dies. Again, an example where using speed amp would save your team from an enemy ultimate. Right, so the third amp you could use is the same as before. You could chase an advantage or kills after you have secured a numbers advantage or resource advantage. You can use amp for rotations, only when you don't need the cooldown for the next engage in the next 12 seconds, because if you do need it to engage and you used it to rotate, then that's obviously suboptimal. So this last one is where things get a little bit different. So you can use speed amp to enable a teammate's ultimate. So one of the nice plays on Lucio that you see from Lucios at a higher elo who coordinate with Rhines or in coordinated team play is amping your Rhine through the enemy Rhine. So they're swinging on each other, they're really close, and then suddenly your Rhine goes 60% faster for 3 seconds. He runs through the enemy Rhine's shield and then shatters their backline. It's a free shatter when coordinating with amp because it's very hard for the enemy Rhine to react in time. Another nice thing you could do is speeding your McCree's High Noon. So he probably gets walled off in a typical Brawl v Brawl. You speed amp him to push him around the wall, essentially, so that he can be a lot quicker towards their team and secure kills because they don't think he can catch up to them, but he's suddenly going super quick. You could speed Death Blossoms, Blades, and even Coalescences. The last two, Blade and Coalescence, really do benefit a lot from speed too. A very fast-moving Moira is ultra dangerous. So let's talk about amping heals. Your amp usage for heals should be used when your team is already engaged and you don't think that you'll need to disengage in the next 12 seconds. So you can use it to up your team's HPS, especially when your other healer is struggling or reloading. You should also amp heals after you've already disengaged and you're trying to stabilize but won't need to re-engage in the next 12 seconds. So say you pulled your team out of the situation, you're all waiting for your Rhine to come back, and your team is low. You're waiting for your big heals to come back too, maybe, so you need to stabilize your team, you would just amp heals. And another time you should amp heals, and this is where it's different than just regular healing, is when you or your team are in an inescapable ultimate. So say your team has all been shattered on the ground, you should amp heals for them. Because amping speed will do nothing because they're CC'd. Same with being in Grav. Maybe that combined with an Ononade is enough for you guys to live through it. So let's talk about Beat Drop Ultimate Generations. This is the graph by Ralph. He made a great video on Alt Charge. So Beat Drop is the slowest farming ultimate in the game. We can see it on the left-hand side of the graph. It costs 2,940 points of ultimate charge to farm. These points are in health or damage. And it can be combined, obviously. And the optimal ratio for a quick beat drop farm is 70% healing, 30% damage. So if you focus too much on damage, so like redditing, you will most of the time build your beat drop too slowly for the ultimates you're trying to use it to counter. If you're focusing too much on healing, you should know that Lucio is suboptimal as a healer. If you wanted to heal, you should have picked a second big heals, not Lucio. You mostly play him for the utility he offers, so like speed and boop. Knowing this to be true, we should not be on heals 100% of the time, otherwise we would be misusing our kit. But we should also not be on speed 100% of the time, otherwise we won't farm our ultimate. So a Lucio that reddits too much is not helpful to their team, but a heal bot is likewise equally useless. To farm quick beat drops, make sure to always be shooting all the time at the enemy team. Specifically, put your crosshair at head height of the enemy tank and keep shooting. You should shoot at narrow lanes, just shoot all the time until you get your ultimate. Be on heals in the appropriate situations mentioned before, and you'll farm your ultimate at a decent rate. because ultimately you do want to farm quickly because you're racing the enemy team's alt generation as well. Let's say you're fighting against a Grab Dragon, you're racing the Zarya and the Hanzo so that you have beat drop in time to defend your team from the incoming alt combo that will almost guaranteed wipe your team. So let's talk about beat drop usage. So defensive versus offensive beat drop usage. There are two kinds of beat drops, defensive beats and offensive beats. Defensive beats are used as a reactionary ultimate in response to an enemy ultimate or ult combo or a situation where your team's health bars fall really low really quick. So big ultimates or combos that you should absolutely be holding beat drop for are Grab Dragon, Blade, Nano Blade, Sigma Flux, Shatter Bomb, Echo Dupe, depending on who she dupes and how good she is at duping, Junkrat Tire, if you're really good about your timings, and Bongos. Because all of these are liable to wipe your team, and so you should probably save your ulti for these. So the last two I have on the list are Blizzard and EMP. So these ones are a little bit special. So I think that some Lucio players believe in beat dropping Blizzard. I personally don't agree because this is a suboptimal use of beat drop because you can still be killed through Blizzard because the person's model is frozen, standing still, and you can just keep headshotting them until you kill through the beat drop. And this happens all the time. So having beat dropped 100 times for 100 Blizzards, I've noticed that through my own experience, Blizzards and beat drops don't mix very well. Because you'll end up wasting your ult because you'll probably still lose your Reinhardt through it, regardless. So you might as well save it for something else. And with EMP, this is a unique situation because EMP will cancel your beat drop. So when you play against an EMP, you have to hide close enough to your team that you can reach them with beat drop, but you need to put a wall between you and the EMP. So generally, I hide behind a wall, one wall behind my team, and then step out and beat drop. Play close to corners and stuff like that, so you can put your back to a corner, so you can see if they're going to try and hack you before they go in for the EMP, so that you can avoid it. So offensive beats, offensive or aggressive beat drops. So, what if the enemy team doesn't have a big combo that you want to beat drop, or any ultimates at all that you want to hold beat for? Or what if the enemy grab dragoned while you were dead? What do you do with your beat now? Well, you should beat drop offensively. You would do this by engaging onto the enemy team with your speed. In scenario 1, you would use your amp to engage, telling your team to play hyper aggressive. When your Ryan's health starts to fall, you would beat drop and then stay on speed, continuing to run over the enemy team. In scenario 2, you would just use regular speed to engage without amping. Your Ryan plays hyper aggressive still, his health starts to fall, you beat drop, then amp speed to run over the enemy team. The only difference for you between scenario 1 and scenario 2 is the timing of the amp. You would pick whichever scenario is best for you and your team depending on the situation. Are you able to engage without losing all your shields or someone getting picked off without needing to use your amp on the engage? You can save your amp for later. If the answer to the question was no, then you can use your amp earlier. The most important thing for you as a Lucio player to know about offensive beating is that you can't offensively beat before you run in because your overshields will decay, and you can't offensively beat if the enemy has an ult combo that you should be beating defensively, because you would probably cause your team to wipe if you beat drop aggressively and then they proceed to grab dragon you. So a note about beat drop. The Lucio who beats first will lose in beat v beat because it's the one who beat drop second that wins because the decay and the shields gives more overall time for the heals to stabilize and gain a health advantage. So here's an example of an offensive beat. So the teams engaged on each other, and then the Lucio hit beat drop as soon as the two teams hit each other so that the enemy team was already committed to the fight. Alright. So I made a flowchart for Lucio decision making when it comes to positioning. So let's start here. Do you have beat drop? If you do have beat drop, you have to ask yourself, does the enemy team have a Sombra with EMP? If yes, then you probably want to defensively beat that. But then how do you hide? So you play outside your team, put one wall behind you and your team, like we talked about before, and then you come out to beat drop the EMP. If they don't have this, but you do have beat drop, then you want to play close to your team at the back so you can avoid getting ulted or killed, preferably behind your other healer. So if you don't have beat drop, then let's go back down the chart. Does the enemy team have dive, DPS, or tanks? So let's start with a no pathing. If they don't have dive, DPS, or tanks, then you have to ask yourself, does the enemy team have snipers or people on high ground? If they do, and you have a diva, then your diva will deal with it. If you don't have a diva and they do have snipers, it's your job to wall ride up to the high ground and contest it. You can boop them down or kill them if you can. If they don't have snipers or high ground, then you just play with your Rhine. So your job is to boop the enemy Rhine back to deny him swings when your Rhine gets low, but you just play standard and try and farm your beat drop by DPSing the enemy tanks. Okay, so let's go back to, does the enemy team have dive, DPS, or tanks? If you have a McCree, then it's probably his job to deal with the dive DPS. But if you have a Kree and the enemy team has snipers or people on the high ground for you to contest, then we go back to the chart from before, which is, do you have a diva? It's her job to contest. If not, then it's your job to contest. And if there are no snipers in play and you still have a McCree and they have dive, tanks, and DPS, you should probably still peel for your Kree and big heals. Because two people peeling for the Ana means she'll probably never die, versus one person peeling for the Ana where it's still a little bit riskier. If you don't have a McCree and the enemy team has dive, DPS, and tanks, then it's your job to peel for your big heals, be it your BAP or your Ana. So how do you peel? Well, you should play the bodyguard position behind your big heals, and that means like stand behind her or behind him to the left or the right, or just directly behind them so you can see still though. So you're watching for incoming threats while body blocking the back of their model with your health bar. So when something engages onto your big heals, you should see it coming, and you should speed your big heals away from the danger. Remember, most of the time it's not going to be a DPS who has a speed boost of their own, so you're able to run away from this person easily. And then you can heal them when they're in a safe situation, and if anything gets too close, you can boop the threats away and put yourself between the danger and your charge. So this chart essentially prepares you for every situation that you could encounter in team play or ladder play that requires you to choose a positioning um, that doesn't involve redditing. So let's talk about boops. So booping is good for a short cooldown ability. It's actually a fantastic ability. And typically it's used for environmental killing people, so pushing them off of ledges. And that's the standard use for it. But it's also good for dispositioning enemies, so you can push them off of high ground, push them into your team. You could peel for yourself, so if something engages on you, you can push it off of you, and then you can peel for your team, pushing threats off of your team. So here's an example of Moth and an environmental boop. So here he gets a 5-man boop against Shock. And that's a typical standard thing to do as Lucio with your boop. But then there's also dispositioning boops. So here, this is FD God. He is going to climb up here, and he's going to coordinate with his team for them to engage while he pushes the enemy team down into them. So this is obviously a super strong use of boop as well. Another example is contesting high ground snipers. So we talked about that earlier. You shoot them 3 times, you boop them in the air to throw off their aim, and then you finish off with 3 more shots and a melee. So what are some ways we can use boop to peel for our team? So this is the most interesting use of boop, and I think that people generally don't use Lucio's boop to peel, and that's super unfortunate because I think this is actually the most valuable part of his kit, his ability to peel. So example scenarios of using boop to peel. Scenario 1, your Rhine is low HP. You play close to the front line, push the enemy Rhine off your Rhine, and amp your Rhine backwards. You've made extra space. Your Rhine is no longer taking damage to his face. Your heal can catch up. Scenario 2, enemy Reaper raced into your team to Death Blossom. You boop him out of his Wraith as he's blossoming to get him away from your team. So like he comes out of Wraith and you push him away. And he hits Q right away as he comes out, but now he's not killed anybody. Scenario 3. Genji double dashes, so he dashes up in the air, pops Blade, dashes again towards your team. You push him away and amp your team backwards. Now he doesn't get any dash resets. So constantly you're denying value from enemy teams' abilities or ultimates just using your regular kit and your ability to disposition them. Scenario 4. Your Ana gets dove. You push the enemy team as they're about to land or engage, and you amp your Ana to safety out of the range of their dive. The enemy has blown all their cooldowns, and they can only sadly watch as you and Ana speed off into the sunset. So there are just like a few normal everyday scenarios where you can see the massive impact that using Boop to peel has on counterplaying the enemy team. So remember that Boop has a lot more potential for playmaking than just redditing people off the map. Before we finish off with Lucio, I want to talk about wall riding. So wall riding is a big part of Lucio's kit. When should we wall ride? I think that during the pre-fight poking phase, it's okay to be on the ground. So when you're poking each other for ultimate at range. During the fight itself, though, and during the engage, you should probably be on the wall. So being on the wall gives you the advantage of moving 30% faster, making you harder to hit, and allowing you to avoid a lot of big cooldowns and damage that you might otherwise get hit by. If you're on a wall, you can be harder to chase down. You're not likely to get shattered, pinned, punched, or even shot at very much at all. You should ultimately die less by wall riding more if you do it correctly. You should be wall riding at the height of your Rhine's head. At that height, you can still be behind your Rhine shield when it's flicked up, and you aren't overly exposed to the enemy team. When playing against snipers like Widow or Ashe, you should generally play lower to the ground to avoid being over the shield if you're playing within your team. This is to avoid getting one shot from wall riding too high up. You should note that most wall riding rollouts are done very high up on the map's terrain to avoid many of the objects you can get caught on at lower levels. So if you're trying to get out of spawn quickly or reach a destination quickly by yourself, generally higher up is on the quicker and easier side. So let's move on to Mercy. So Mercy isn't the strongest healer in the game, but she's good for one thing, and that's her damage boost. And that makes her exceptional at pocketing. That's what she's generally used for in most team play, with some exceptions. Her strength is increasing her team's overall damage output. Her overall healing output is pretty low compared to a Baptiste or an Ana. So let's begin by looking at Mercy settings. So Mercy has a few settings. She has super jump. She has a few settings. So like, she has toggle beam connection, which involves pretty much if you have it on, then you only need to press once and your beam will stay on until you press it off onto the target. Guardian Angel prefers beam target. It's just your Guardian Angel will prefer jumping to the person your beam is attached to, even if you're looking at somebody else. Toggle Guardian Angel is something you should pretty much always have on, because then you could just let go of the key and it'll stop. Otherwise, it'll keep going. Finish it off, I think. And the rest is just sensitivity. So Guardian Angel prefers beam target is the most important one to talk about. Personally, I have it off because it's nice to be able to heal somebody while keeping the healing on and then jumping to someone else that you're looking at, instead of always having to hook on to the person you're attached to or having to let go to jump away. So if you're pocketing a stationary hero, and pocketing a stationary hero is different than pocketing a mobile hero, this would be an Ashe, for example, a soldier or a Kree. You should position close to cover and social your pocket. This is allow you to get easy reses off should they lose their 1v1. Even while behind cover, you should still be strafing back and forth in unpredictable patterns. A lot of lower elo mercies simply stand still, making them easy targets for flankers and snipers. So what should you be looking at when pocketing a stationary hero? Should be looking at your team, your pocket, a wall, the enemy team, or something else. I think that you should be looking at where the enemy team might flank you from. Your pocket is watching front, so you should be watching behind. A lot of Mercy players like to put their faces into walls, and obviously this is suboptimal. If you are pocketing a stationary hero, sometimes instead of standing on the ledge with them, you can hang off the ledge and Guardian Angel to them for more unpredictable mobility to avoid initial damage from a dive. So here's an example of Moth hovering off the high ground to avoid taking damage from the enemy Hanzo that his Hanzo is dueling. So pocketing a mobile hero. If you're pocketing a hero with high mobility, such as Echo or Pharah that can fly, then your gameplay will be a little bit trickier but also more dynamic. It's obviously more fun to play. You have to keep track of a moving object, which is your pocket, so that you don't lose them when they reposition. You have to make your mobility as unpredictable as possible to avoid getting killed in the sky, since you'll often play out of cover. You can do this by slingshotting and then falling quickly. If you want to be really fancy, you can really protect your head hitbox by spinning while you fall. Erratic movements instead of just floating downwards while holding your float space key make you harder to hit or get one shot. You have to constantly be aware of hero switches from the enemy DPS as well as the enemy team comp and certain ultimates. You absolutely have to track hit scan ultimates and Diva Bomb, perhaps even Dragon Blade if you think the Genji will blade you. When the enemy team has Bomb, Visor, or Noon, you absolutely have to fly closer to cover and remind your partner to do the same to avoid dying in a preventable way. The height at which you fly is dependent on a few things. So when you are playing against a Widow or an Ashe with a pocket, you should fly below your Pharah, closer to the ground if there's no cover. If you're playing against a Soldier with no ultimate, a Kree with no ultimate, Diva no ulti, or Ashe with no pocket, higher up in the air is better for you, using the Pharah's body for cover, because then you can abuse damage fall off. In scenario 3, a Soldier with ultimate, Kree with ultimate, Diva with ultimate, you should fly close to cover, ready to hit the ground as quickly as possible when they pop these ultimates so you can get into cover. Otherwise, you'll be caught out and probably die. Remember, as Mercy, your life is worth 2 people's worth of lives because you can res 1. So staying alive is most important. So here's an example of the slingshotting. Yeah, so this Mercy player is talking about how erratic flying and movement makes it harder for a hit scan DPS to pick them off. Projectiles too. So when should you let go of your pocket? You should always communicate when you're letting go, first of all. And you should let go when you can safely res without you or your pocket dying. So if you leave your Pharah is playing against 3 hit scans, like 2 DPS and an Ana, who are all shooting her, so you can go res your Reinhardt, then you're essentially trading your Pharah's life for a res that you may or may not be able to accomplish. So make sure you're able to get this res off safely without you or your pocket dying, and that could be done by communicating to your Pharah that they have to play more conservatively without taking any damage during this time that you're not with them, because that damage will not get healed. Another good reason to leave your pocket is when your other healer needs healing and is not able to heal themselves. So again, communicate with your pocket that you're leaving them, so they don't take unnecessary risks or leave without you. It is acceptable to heal your other DPS when they come close to you, so when you don't need a Guardian Angel away, and they're in need of healing, but you have to again communicate this. And the last reason you should leave is when you're kiting an ultimate, for example, Dragon Blade, Diva Bomb, or you're low HP, because then you just need to get out of the way. If your pocket dies, then you can come back and res them, but if you die, it's over. So Guardian Angel key input guide. So if you want to stop right on your target, then you would hit your space key to jump, and then you would use your left shift to Guardian Angel to the person. If you want to land short of your target, then you would just left shift without any key inputs. If you want to go past your target, then you would Guardian Angel and then space as you're about to hit them, holding space all the way through until you want to stop. Super jumping is the tricky one, and it's Guardian Angeling and space at the same time. And when your Mercy's model goes downwards as you're about to hit the target, you let go and then you hit space. So I have a few examples. Here's super jump tech that Moth does to help him get to high ground when he's not visible. So I would agree with Jake. It was a nice use of Guardian Angel and Super Jumping. Um, Healing Beam, not Healing Beam versus Damage Beam. Alright, so blue or yellow beam? When should you heal versus damage boost, and how healing affects your other healer's ult generation? So most of the time, Mercy is actually played in ladder not necessarily with a Zenyatta or a Brig, but with another big healer like an Ana or a BAP, and the Mercy is used to pocket. In these scenarios, if you heal other people than your pocket, you're actually taking ult charge away from your other healer. So you would be better off gaining ult charge for the person you're pocketing by damage boosting them and gaining ult charge for yourself. So blue beaming, much better for you than yellow beaming. So if you play two big healers, don't yoink charge from your other healer. If you are the primary healer, as in the big healer, you should focus most on maintaining health bars and then damage boost where you can. You should only damage boost when your pocket's health bar is full. So when and how should you res? You should res if you have cover from physical terrain or from your team. Remember that you are worth your own life and that of one res, so you should never die for a res on anybody unless you think it will influence the outcome of the fight. So that could involve resing your main tank, because most fights are lost when your main tank is lost and they still have theirs. Or maybe your big heals, because maybe your team will wipe if you don't have enough healing and you're not able to output enough by yourself. People often camp reses, so make sure to be careful. To make your reses safer, if it's unsafe to immediately res, then you have one of three choices. Leave and come back for the res at the end of the timer, or use Valkyrie to res, making it harder for you to die or get booped out of it, or like a combination of both, so leaving and Valkyrie and coming back later. Of course, your other option is just to not res, but a small tip that people often don't take advantage of enough is to res from max distance, so you can res things that are slightly out of reach of cover. You can move backwards a certain amount or just off of the res. So you should get comfortable with the max res distance. So here's an example of resing off of a ledge. This makes it safer because then you're out of sight lines. Here's an example of max range resing. So behind a wall, max distance, everything that he can do to make it safer. Alright, now let's talk about Valkyrie. So there are different kinds of uses for Valkyrie, or different categories that Valkyrie falls under, really. So there's Temple Valkyries, and this involves ramping up damage or healing for your team to overwhelm the enemy team because you have higher overall DPS output as a team or HPS output as a team. It acts as like a bongo, encouraging aggro play from your team because they know that they have more resources during that duration. Alternatively, you can use your Valkyrie to secure a kill on an enemy target safely. For example, against a Pharah or a Widow, they're easily vulnerable targets to you that you can kill. And then you can use your Valkyrie, as we said before, for securing dangerous reses on key targets like your main tank, who die in sticky situations that you would not otherwise be able to res because of enemy boop or aggro. Um, Another interesting use for Valkyrie is to combo it with an ultimate into enemy dangerous territory. So Valking and blading is a good example of when you'd probably want to be in Valkyrie to pocket the blade if you're not confident being able to pocket it without the Valk. You can also use it to save yourself from dying, and I think this is a perfectly acceptable thing to do because, again, you're worth 2 lives. You can always get your Valkyrie back, but if you're dead that fight and you aren't able to res someone else, then that's not very good. And then, of course, you can use it as a defensive for your team. It's like a pseudo-defensive. It's not quite as good, but you'd use this in a reactionary way. So if your team gets fluxed, or when your big heal is dead, but you have to push this fight to keep happening when you can't res them, you would use it in these scenarios. I suppose there aren't going to be any questions, so thank you for watching.